8 years in corporate America will teach you two things: how to survive without applause and how to disappear in plain sight. My name's Claire Mitchell, though inside these glass towers, my name might as well be drywall. Silent, unpainted, holding up weight no one bothers to notice. I was the one who fixed things at midnight, who stitched contracts back together before clients ever smelled blood. And for 8 years, I let them forget who kept the machine from grinding itself into ash. I knew something was off the moment I saw a pink sticky note plastered to my monitor. Lunch with new client. Written in neat block letters, Derek Tate's attempt at charm. He couldn't negotiate a vending machine without overpaying. Yet here he was, scribbling smiley faces like this was a sorority bake sale. I peeled it off, dropped it into my coffee, and went back to redlining a non-disclosure agreement worth more than Derek's entire career. 3 minutes later, legal pinged me in a panic. Someone had submitted the NDA without the classified annex, critical for a defense tech contract north of $100 million. I didn't waste time asking who screwed it up. I rebuilt the draft, looped in general counsel, and blind BCC'd myself on every thread in case anyone developed amnesia about who saved the day. Again. No thank you, no good catch. Just silence. Then a Slack notification from Derek. Client says we're good to go. I stared at the screen expressionless. The deal wasn't even cleared yet. He thought this was celebration time. I wasn't angry. Anger takes energy. I was tired in the way old beams get tired, still holding the house up but sagging behind the drywall. That's how it always went. I kept the company's relationships stitched together like ghostly thread. Clients trusted me to translate corporate nonsense into deals they could sign without lighting their hair on fire. New hires came and went, half of them barely able to CC the right distribution lists, and still I was the first one dragged into the blame pit when cracks showed. My name never made it into glossy newsletters or LinkedIn panels. But God forbid I wasn't there when a multi-million-dollar fire needed smothering. You want to know what that does to a person? It hollows you out. It makes you efficient, invisible, patient. It turns you into a scalpel, sharp, precise, and quiet enough to forget until someone bleeds. But in this place, visibility was currency, and I didn't trade in it. I let others have the spotlight, the applause, the credit. That included Juliette Monroe, our CFO, a woman who hadn't personally negotiated a contract in a decade, but smiled pretty on quarterly earnings calls while my groundwork paid her bonuses. Juliette floated through the halls like she was allergic to eye contact, heels clicking like a metronome of quiet threats. And then there was Derek, nephew of the CEO. Hair gelled, shirt collar always just low enough to look approachable, eyes so blank you could project a PowerPoint on them. He was the future, they said. Fresh energy, they said. He was invited into rooms I used to run, included on email threads I had opened. I caught him once parroting my talking points to a longtime client who later messaged me privately. Did we downgrade? I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had that week. But deep under that laugh, a tectonic plate shifted. Ghosts don't like being seen unless they intend to haunt. So I sat there, staring at the sticky note dissolving in my coffee, watching Derek celebrate a deal he didn't understand, listening to Juliette praise modern energy while dismissing me as legacy. And in that moment, I knew something no one else in that building suspected. I wasn't drywall anymore. I was the foundation. And the foundation, if it wants to, can decide how and when the house falls. I learned early that survival in these halls meant embracing invisibility. My job was not to shine. It was to absorb chaos, clean it, and leave no fingerprints. While Derek was busy practicing his LinkedIn smile in mirrored elevator doors, I was intercepting couriers who showed up at reception with prototype blueprints stuffed in sandwich bags when those documents should have been encrypted and transmitted across secure channels. While he babbled through kickoff calls and misused terms like cap table and vertical integration, I was putting out the fires he casually lit, patching contracts so clients didn't bolt for competitors, reworking service agreements so we didn't accidentally hand away free support worth millions. My workdays blurred into loops of rescue. 1 hour, I was smoothing over a procurement fiasco by quietly rewriting an RFP clause. The next, I was calling in favors from engineers to suppress a bug report that Derek's promises had prematurely exposed. No recognition, no applause, just an endless rhythm of silent saves. In the boardroom, I was invisible furniture. The folding chair in the corner no one looked at, but everyone relied on when the floor threatened to cave. The CFO, Juliette Monroe, loved that arrangement. She floated above the wreckage with immaculate hair and expensive heels that clicked like knives. She hadn't touched a real negotiation in 10 years, yet every successful deal somehow became her story on the next investor call. My groundwork, her credit, my sleepless nights, her glossy newsletters, and she never looked at me directly, not unless she wanted to remind me that I was background noise. At first I didn't care. Let her take the spotlight. I just wanted the contracts to hold. But then her attention shifted toward Derek. She began praising his fresh perspective, his modern energy. She put him on project threads I had opened, gave him seats in meetings I used to run, even let him present strategies lifted word for word from my notes. Clients who had trusted me for years were suddenly subjected to his hollow pitch, and more than one reached out afterward, confused, asking if we had downgraded our standards. I laughed at those messages, but underneath the laughter, something darker stirred. Ghosts do not like being ignored when they choose to appear, and I had started to appear whether I wanted to or not. Then, Juliette delivered her knife and sugar. She stopped by my desk one afternoon, leaned close enough for her perfume to sting, and said with a smile, "We need fresh faces, Claire. Legacy slows deals down." 8 years of carrying her pipeline, reduced to an expired gym membership. I blinked once, kept my expression flat, and said, "You mean people who can read a contract without confusing net revenue with revenue net of losses?" Her smile tightened, but she walked away. That was the moment the plates shifted under my feet. That was when I began preparing the quiet architecture of an exit they would never see coming. That night, I stayed late. Alone, as always. I opened my spreadsheets, the lifeblood of accounts no one else fully understood, and started building a new one. I titled it simply, "Legacy Accounts Do Not Edit." It was not sabotage, not yet. It was a reminder, a blueprint, a coiled wire waiting. For the first time in years, I allowed myself the smallest smile. A fossil smile, the kind that survives long after the bones around it have crumbled. By the time Derek's promotion email hit our inboxes, the writing was already carved into the glass walls around me. Subject line, introducing our new client liaison, Derek Tate. A professional headshot followed, cropped from what looked like a Hugo Boss catalog. Collar open just enough to signal approachable, 5 o'clock shadow manicured like it had its own stylist, eyes so vacant you could run a PowerPoint on them. I didn't bother opening it. I had been in the building during his photo shoot, listening to him parade around in 3 different outfits, asking which tie popped best for camera. Minutes later, my manager forwarded the announcement with a single line. "Loop Derek into anything client-facing going forward, THX." No punctuation, no context, just a quiet shove into irrelevance. By noon, Derek had already scheduled a sync to strategize synergy touchpoints, which was corporate code for having me explain the basics to him while he played Labrador with a Bluetooth headset. I sat through 40 minutes of him fumbling terms he didn't understand, mispronouncing omni-channel like it was a Scandinavian ski resort, and name-dropping his uncle, the CEO, like I didn't know the only reason he had a chair in that room was bloodline. I kept my face still, my notes clean, my patience sharp enough to cut glass. Then came Juliet. She hovered through the office that afternoon, heels clicking like a metronome of disdain, immaculate hair framing the kind of smile that only existed to cut. She stopped just long enough at my desk to deliver her signature sugar-coated knife. "We need fresh faces, Claire. Legacy slows deals down." I remembered those words because they landed like nails hammered into wood that had been holding weight too long. I should have been used to it by then. 8 years of being overlooked, discarded, rebranded as furniture. But that was the moment she made her mistake. Because she said it not behind closed doors, not in the sanitized language of performance reviews, but out loud, in daylight, in front of the people who depended on me without realizing it. She thought she was cutting me out. What she was really doing was setting the stage for collapse. That evening, the company newsletter dropped into my inbox, glossy PDF, full color. Headline, "Bringing Modern Energy to Client Relations." And there he was again, Derek, smiling in a staged handshake with a vice president from a Japanese telecom I had personally brought into the fold last year. A client who, until that very photo, had refused to meet with anyone but me. I clicked archive. Derek walked past my office moments later, holding a smoothie, grinning like he had just discovered LinkedIn Premium. "Yo, Claire, did you see the newsletter? Crazy, right? They used the shot I didn't even think they'd pick." I didn't look up. "The one with your mouth closed. Smart choice." He didn't get the jab, just pointed finger guns and vanished down the hall. That night, I stayed late again. Same empty office, same fluorescent hum. I reviewed every active account, checked every clause I had brokered myself, every deal still tethered to my credentials. I didn't move anything, not yet. But I opened that new spreadsheet, the one I had labeled Legacy Accounts, Do Not Edit, and I began annotating. Quietly, carefully, patiently. Because if Juliet wanted me gone and Derek wanted my crown, they were both about to learn what happens when you strip the paint and forget who built the frame. It was never my plan to burn anything down. I wanted quiet, distance, a life where I didn't have to carry the weight of men who mistook confidence for competence. But the cracks started forming on their own, wide enough for me to slip a finger through. Derek was given his first major negotiation within a week of that newsletter, a multi-year logistics contract with a client I had nurtured since before Juliet even learned the product line. All he had to do was read the prepared draft, smile, and keep his mouth shut. Instead, I watched from my desk as he walked into the wrong meeting room, carried the wrong version of the contract, and then, with that brand of arrogance only bloodline promotions produce, agreed to include reverse logistics support free of charge. Millions in services, handed away like free napkins at a diner. The client messaged me directly that evening, asking if it was a tactic, some new negotiation approach I hadn't briefed them on. I told them the truth. It was real, not strategy. I promised to escalate and correct it, but then I did nothing. I let the breach simmer, let Derek cook in his own incompetence. Silence can be more lethal than any outburst. In the background, I opened my spreadsheet again and added one line under their account. Clause equals optional early exit trigger if deliverables unmet. I had written that safeguard years ago, a dormant switch hidden in legal wallpaper Juliet never once bothered to read. Meanwhile, Juliet kept parading Derek like he was a prize bull at auction. She brought him to pipeline meetings, gave him the seat beside her, praised his modern touch, while my name was absent from every agenda. I stopped being surprised. Instead, I began the process of extraction. 3 hours of my calendar blocked as focus time. Slack notifications turned off. Recurring syncs quietly canceled if they didn't explicitly require my credentials. When teams asked for documents, I sent them archived versions filled with outdated decks. Not sabotage, just distance, just giving them exactly what they asked for, a world without me in it. And still the machine kept running, because my fingerprints were all over its gears. Clients noticed faster than management did. A longtime East Coast partner emailed bluntly, "Please confirm Claire will be on Thursday's strategy call as discussed." Derek forwarded it to Juliet with the subject line, "LOL, they still think Claire's running stuff." Juliet replied directly to the client without even copying me, announcing that I had transitioned into a back-office role and that Derek would handle the call. Thursday came and went. No follow-up, no renewal, no noise. Just silence, the kind loaded with warning. By Monday, the whispers began. Finance analysts muttering about missing renewals, projections trimmed 5%. Juliet spinning it as a market correction when the truth was bleeding through the walls. I said nothing. I sat at my desk with a cup of tea, raspberry hibiscus still hot, and I watched. Because once you start loosening the screws, you don't have to push. The weight does the rest. Silence is a scalpel. You don't swing it, you don't brandish it, you just press lightly until the pressure finds its way into the bone. By the time finance whispered about shrinking forecasts, I had already set the blade. It began with a single email, stripped of pleasantries, designed to look like nothing more than background noise. Subject line, Deal 458. Urgent review suggested. Body. Recommend reviewing Deal 458, changelog before Friday. No greeting, no signature, no context. I hit send at 9:41 a.m., then slid my laptop to the far corner of the desk like a completed puzzle. One sentence, nothing more. But I knew what it would detonate. 2 weeks earlier, Juliet, in a cocktail of arrogance and exhaustion, had signed off on the removal of a clause buried deep in the appendix of Deal 458. Derek had nudged her to simplify the legal jargon so clients wouldn't get overwhelmed. She hadn't involved legal, hadn't read the fine print, hadn't realized that clause was the glue holding 3 major pipelines together: supply chain, vendor lock-in, and data sovereignty. Without it, the entire structure violated investor commitments, SEC disclosures, and forward-looking statements baked into Q4 guidance. Juliet thought she was streamlining. What she had done was saw through the floor beneath her own feet. At 9:59 a.m., I heard it, the CEO's voice echoing down the hallway like glass breaking under pressure. "Who approved this clause removal? Who signed this?" Papers rustled, footsteps scrambled, the air pressure dropped as panic spread. Juliet's name was on the signature line. Derek's suggestion was in the margin notes. Legal was blindsided. Compliance was already flashing red alerts. I didn't move. I sipped my coffee, warm against my palms, and stared out the window as if the chaos was happening on another floor. By 10:02, my desk phone rang. By 10:04, my cell buzzed with Juliet's number. Then again, then again. Voicemail each time. At 10:07, the CEO's assistant appeared pale as printer paper at my door. "Claire, he's asking for you." I smiled softly, nodded once, and said, "Tell him I'm on my way." But I didn't stand. Not yet. I let the weight sit. Because this wasn't vengeance. Not really. It was release. 8 years of invisibility, 8 years of being dismissed as legacy, reduced to furniture, erased from agendas, all unraveling in a single line of text. In the conference room, Juliet's face collapsed into panic. Derek tried to explain with a slurry of buzzwords that sounded like confetti thrown into a shredder. His voice shook, his hands damp, his confidence draining with every syllable. He had been groomed for photo ops, not firestorms. Juliet tried to point the finger outward, to cast the blame on oversight gaps, on miscommunication. But every document traced back to her sign-off. And I sat still, quiet, the ghost in the corner who had finally decided to be seen. The empire doesn't crumble with explosions. It crumbles with paper cuts, with missing signatures, with clauses no one bothered to read. And as Juliet's voice cracked, As Derek's mask slipped, I realized the house was already falling. All I had done was pull the right nail. By morning, the conference room looked less like a strategy session and more like a wake for bad decisions. Juliet's chair sat empty, her nameplate removed as if she had never existed. Word drifted through the halls that she was on personal leave, but everyone knew the truth. An all-hands legal debrief had run until midnight, outside auditors had been called, and Juliet had been escorted out under the sterile glow of security lights. The woman who once dismissed me as legacy was now reduced to a rumor whispered over burnt coffee. Derek, however, remained. Pale, sweating through his pressed shirt, he slouched at the far end of the table like a child called to the principal's office. When the CEO asked him to walk us through client assurance protocols, Derek launched into a word salad so thick it could have been served as corporate stew. Terms collided, buzzwords fell out of his mouth like loose change, and midway through his ramble, his nose began to bleed. Red streaks stained his sleeve as he tried to blot it without pausing, as if ignoring biology could salvage credibility. The sight was grotesque and perfect, his competence leaking out of him for all to see. No one laughed. No one saved him. The CEO didn't even acknowledge Derek's collapse. His attention was fixed on me, his voice raw as he addressed the board and legal counsel. We made a critical error in internal transitions. Mitchell's operational oversight was far more integrated than we realized. Going forward, we are offering her full latitude, executive authority, whatever she requires, if she chooses to re-engage. Heads nodded, pens scratched. Board members glanced my way with suddenly softened eyes, as though remembering I had always been here, always saving them from themselves. It might have felt like vindication, but it was something colder. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked out without a word. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. In the days after, the messages poured in. LinkedIn requests from directors who had once forgotten my name, polite emails from executives asking for a quick chat, even personal calls from the CEO himself. I ignored them all. Instead, I uploaded a final zipped file to the internal legal server, labeled simply, Legacy Continuity, Mitchell-only.zip. In the notes field, I wrote one sentence, Decor breaks easily, handle with care. Then I wiped my laptop, slid my badge across the desk to an intern who still didn't know where the restrooms were, and left. As the elevator doors closed, alarms began to pulse across the 12th floor. Not fire alarms, but compliance alerts, expired vendor triggers, broken contract links flashing red on dashboards. The strategic pipeline I had built and then unthreaded was officially ownerless. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn. I stepped into the parking garage with the calm of someone walking out of therapy. Behind me, an empire groaned under its own weight, stripped of the one foundation it thought was just decoration. Leaving wasn't dramatic. No slammed doors, no farewell speeches, no cinematic music swelling in the background. I walked across the concrete of the parking garage, the echo of my heels swallowed by fluorescent hum, and slid into my car like it was just another Thursday. But inside the building, I had abandoned. The machine was grinding against itself. Alerts were firing across compliance dashboards. Renewal portals were locked behind credentials no one could produce, and vendor pipelines froze midstream. They would call it a technical glitch in their statements. I knew better. It was the sound of screws loosening, beams creaking, weight shifting off balance. News traveled quickly. Within a week, 2 long-standing clients pulled out entirely. Another 3 froze contracts pending review. The markets responded faster than Juliet ever had. Stock price dipped. Analysts cited internal instability. Whispers of leadership incompetence spread like wildfire. Derek tried to front the storm with a LinkedIn Live panel, talking about innovation and synergy while the floor burned beneath him. Comments piled in beneath the video, half of them mocking his jargon, the other half speculating on when the board would finally cut him loose. He had been decorated for show, but decor breaks fastest when pressure builds. I stayed silent. No interviews, no op-eds, no gloating emails. I let the collapse speak for me. At night, I sometimes opened the backup drive I had taken with me, scrolled through old contracts, saw my fingerprints on every clause, every hidden safeguard, every legal tripwire. I didn't regret it. I had built the skeleton they had danced on, and when they dismissed me as outdated, I simply stepped aside and let gravity do what it always does. The CEO called 3 more times. His assistant sent flowers once, a neat bouquet of lilies that arrived at my apartment wrapped in corporate blue ribbon. I left them on the counter until the petals browned and the water soured, then dropped the vase into the trash without ceremony. They had their chance to see me when it mattered. Recognition delivered only in desperation is just another insult. People like Juliet and Derek think power is loud, visible, shiny. They believe it lives in corner offices and headlines. But true power is quiet. It is knowing which key unlocks which vault, which clause turns a renewal into a breach, which handshakes are binding, and which are performance. I had carried that power for years without flaunting it, and when I withdrew it, the void swallowed them whole. I never returned to that building. By the time the board said my name again, I was already gone, watching from a distance as an empire unraveled piece by piece. I did not cheer. I did not mourn. I simply existed in the silence I had earned, free from the weight of carrying people who never noticed the scaffolding until it disappeared. The truth was simple, almost laughable. They called me legacy. They called me furniture. They called me nothing. But when I walked away, the house fell with me. The headlines arrived before the official statements did. Business journals framed it as a sudden restructuring. Analysts called it a leadership vacuum. And one trade magazine splashed a headline that read simply, "Collapse in plain sight." They speculated about Juliet's disappearance, whispered about Derek's bloodline protection, dissected the board's silence. None of them mentioned my name. Not at first. To them, I was still a shadow, the quiet figure who never appeared on panels or press releases. That anonymity suited me. It was the same camouflage that let me move unseen for 8 years while carrying their empire on my shoulders. But the shareholders knew. The clients knew. You could hear it in the questions posed during investor calls, the sharp edge of suspicion when renewal delays were explained away as system adjustments. You could see it in the red lines on quarterly projections, numbers Juliet once boasted would only climb, now bleeding down like cracks spreading across glass. Derek tried to hold the stage, smiling through his embarrassment, spitting out the same jargon he'd always used. Each word landed flatter than the last. Confidence without competence is a mask, and masks melt under fire. I remained absent. I didn't take calls from reporters, didn't respond to recruiters, didn't post any triumphant revelations online. I understood something they didn't. Real revenge is not noise. It is absence. It is silence that echoes louder than any headline. I had already left my last words inside their server, sealed in a file labeled Legacy Continuity, Mitchell only, with that single warning typed beneath. Decor breaks easily. Handle with care. That was enough. Weeks passed. Friends inside the building sent me fragments. Juliet was gone for good. Derek stripped of client-facing duties. Board members cycling through crisis consultants like changing light bulbs in a burning house. None of it surprised me. Every empire collapses from the foundation outward, and I had been the foundation. Remove the support, the rest caves in under its own arrogance. On a cold Friday morning, I walked past that building one last time. From the sidewalk, it looked the same. Glass shining, lobby polished. the illusion of stability preserved. But I knew better. I knew how hollow it was inside, how the gears no longer aligned, how the system stuttered without the quiet presence it had once dismissed as replaceable. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. Ghosts don't return to the houses they've already haunted. So I kept walking, coat pulled tight against the wind, leaving behind nothing but silence. No trail, no fireworks, no revenge speech. Just the truth surfacing in its own time. The truth that every wall, every deal, every carefully balanced promise had once depended on me. They called me legacy. They called me nothing. And then, when I vanished, they finally learned what nothing feels like. I didn't watch the company's final unraveling. By the time the board made its desperate pivots, I had already stepped into a different life, one where my name wasn't tethered to contracts, dashboards, or compliance alarms. I rented a small apartment in Boston overlooking the harbor, traded corporate heels for quiet mornings, and let the phone ring itself into silence. Old colleagues still tried to reach me, emails marked urgent, voicemails heavy with panic, but I left them unanswered. They weren't really calling for me. They were calling for the ghost of who I had been, and that ghost no longer worked for them. News outlets kept circling. Eventually, one headline slipped my name into print, describing me as the overlooked strategist whose absence triggered cascading failures. They made it sound mythic, like I had orchestrated the collapse with cinematic precision. The truth was simpler. I had stopped holding up the house, and the house fell. I didn't need to add commentary, didn't need to shape the narrative. Silence was still the sharpest blade I carried. Sometimes, late at night, I opened the backup drive one more time. Contracts, clauses, deals. Each one a fossil of the years I spent invisible. Each one a reminder of how much weight a quiet hand can hold. I would scroll through, not with nostalgia, but with clarity. They had mistaken me for wallpaper. They had mistaken my patience for passivity. What they never understood was that silence is not weakness. It is choice. I never reached back to claim what they offered. Executive authority, a seat at the table, whatever golden leash they dangled. Power given too late is just another chain. I chose distance instead, a clean break. In my new life, there were no Slack pings, no last-minute contract fires, no half-baked pitches to salvage. Just quiet. Real quiet. The kind you don't have to fight for. One evening, I walked past a bookstore downtown and saw a business magazine in the window. On its cover, the CEO of my former company, jaw clenched, headlines screaming about restructuring. Inside that issue, I knew there would be charts, blame games, promises to rebuild. But I didn't buy it. I kept walking, because ghosts don't linger where the walls have already crumbled. I didn't vanish out of spite. I vanished because sometimes the only way to win is to stop playing. Let them call me legacy. Let them call me nothing. I know what I was. I was the foundation. And when I left, I proved the simplest truth of all. Nothing is stronger than silence, and silence, once chosen, is unstoppable. In the end, there was no explosion, no single moment anyone could point to as the collapse. It happened the way ice breaks in spring. First a whisper, then a crack, then silence where once there was weight. Months later, I heard the company had merged under duress, its name diluted into another banner, its leaders scattered like ash. Derek disappeared from corporate feeds, Juliet's profile went dark, and the empire they had guarded with arrogance became a footnote in quarterly reports. My name was never spoken in those articles. Not really, but that was the final proof of victory. They had built an entire world on my invisibility, and in the end, invisibility was what destroyed them. I carried no trophies from that chapter, no framed contracts, no awards that would gather dust on a shelf. All I took was clarity. Clarity that silence is not absence, but choice. Clarity that power doesn't shout, it waits. Clarity that sometimes the loudest act of revenge is to walk away and let gravity do its work. On a quiet morning in Boston, I stood by the harbor, the air sharp with salt and cold light, and I realized I felt weightless. No alarms, no summons, no one mistaking me for furniture. Just the steady tide, pulling in and out, erasing footprints as if they were never there. That was enough. They once called me legacy, decoration, background. They mistook endurance for weakness, silence for compliance. What they never understood until too late was that the walls they leaned on had a name, and the name was mine. And when I left, I did not leave a hole. I left a lesson. That even in a house of glass and steel, the quietest foundation decides when the structure stands and when it falls.